Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter horror stories. First story, how I became a Wendigo. My name is Levi, and I'm 19. I live in the countryside of central North Carolina. I usually like to go on a walk in the woods after I get off work to relieve stress from working all night. Earlier this week, something strange made me question my entire reality. This is my story, the story of how I became a Wendigo. I was walking through the woods, as I usually did after getting off work, when I heard something ahead of me about 50 feet. I curiously walked over fallen logs and rotting leaves to investigate the noise I had heard. I instantly recoiled in horror at the disgusting sight laid before my eyes. There was a bloody corpse of a deer, its body almost unidentifiable with all the blood and insides splattered all over the fallen leaves. I regained my composure slightly until I realized I was getting hungry. I looked closer and realized that this dead thing was not a deer. I lost every sense of rationality as the hunger I felt enveloped me. I heard whispers in my mind as I suddenly realized my surroundings. It had grown dark and I had blood on my shirt. I let out a horrified scream as I realized what I had done. The whispers I had heard were speaking to me again. I heard them say, "You ate the flesh of the cursed king. Now you will become the new cursed king. Rejoice, for this is the time of rebirth, the time of new life." I felt the world fall to black. I woke up to see myself in a circle of blood, surrounded by hooded figures wearing deer skulls. On closer inspection, it seemed as if they weren't just masks. They chanted in a language I didn't understand, and I started to scream as I felt unbearable pain. I was unable to move as their chanting only grew louder. I blacked out and woke up an unknown time later on what I could only describe as a bloody throne of bones, rotten flesh, and what looked like bits of hair. I was unable to move as I saw a vision of what I call a Wendigo ripped its head off and slammed it on my own. There are things that have been happening to me that I cannot explain. I cannot help this feeling of dread and extreme hunger I have. I want to eat humans. I have an insatiable hunger, and I cannot escape what I have become. I cannot explain what I have become. I don't know what I'm going to do now. I felt extremely sick, and I passed out once more. As I slipped away from reality, I felt only pain and sorrow, but could not cry in pain. I somehow woke up in my room, and I've decided to seek help with the last of my sanity intact. Please, if you know what's going on, I need help. I've already eaten 4 people, and I'm starting to grow antlers and grow fur. My hands are black, and my claws make it hard to type. Please, I'm begging you. If you see me while traveling in North Carolina, kill me. I'm leaving as soon as I post this, so I don't hurt anyone else. It's too late for me now. Second story. Why I don't go hunting anymore. Here's a recollection of the scariest experience I've ever witnessed. It all started some time ago, during the closing weekend of the Northern Zone rifle season in New York. The sun sets around 4:30, but it's already pitch black by 4 o'clock. I figured freezing my ass off wasn't worth another 15 minutes of hunting. I climbed down from the frigid tree stand, my back turned to the dark, silent forest. Normally, the walk back to the main road takes about 10 minutes, but it took me an hour. Whether it was the darkness, the cold, or sheer exhaustion, I lost my way. And, like a hungry lion, the forest seemed to swallow me whole. Stumbled through the mud-covered snow, my white knuckles growing even paler as my grip tightened around my rifle. The sounds around me were faint, the hostile wind whipping through the forest, the soft clink of my bullets in my pocket, until suddenly I heard it, a sound I'd never forget, a sound that still haunts me to this day, the cry of an infant, wailing, calling for a mother who wasn't there. I froze in my tracks, but only for a moment. Then I started walking faster, breaking into a light jog. The rational part of me insisted it was just some half-starved coyotes, scavenging for any scraps to ease their shriveled stomachs. But deep down, I knew that was the biggest load of bullshit on God's green earth. After running for 15 minutes, I stopped to catch my breath, gasping for air in the cold, icy wind. When I finally lifted my head, I realized just how complete the darkness around me was, my headlamp barely making a dent. My phone had never been great in the woods, but I'd always managed to get a signal when I needed it. This time, though, my phone wouldn't even turn on. Then, I heard something that shook me even more than the infant's cry. The voice of a woman coming from deep within the woods. At first, it was a light, almost gleeful laugh, but then came words chilling in their calmness. "Hello, I see you. You know that, right?" Her voice had a strange, twisted cheerfulness to it, like she was savoring my fear. If I hadn't been running before, I was certainly sprinting now. The forest around me seemed to come alive with an unsettling chorus of laughter, cries, and agony. The sounds of an unseen symphony wailed into the night, each note a twisted blend of every human emotion, harmonizing into a singular, horrifying sound of pure terror. Then it stopped. Silence closed in around me as I took in my surroundings, a clearing I didn't recognize, yet somehow felt familiar, like it had lived in a dream I couldn't quite recall. The clearing was barren, save for a stark white tree standing alone in the middle of the muddy landscape. Its twisted branches reached upward, as if grasping for an unseen place, a place not meant for human eyes. The tree was a grisly tangle of knotted branches, skeletal white bark, and an unsettling, silent aversion. I took a step closer, my hand reaching out, yearning for something that wasn't there. At the center of the tree, a crude drawing was carved, a rough outline of a human female, her form distorted and unnatural. Her hair ran down to the roots of the tree, disappearing underneath miles of bloody soil. Perhaps the most chilling detail of all was the X carved in her chest, right where her heart should have been. Jutting out from the X, right where the lines intersected, was a rusty nail driven deep into the tree's surface. Finally, my hand reached its destination, the head of the nail protruding from the bark which released from the tree like a knife slowly pulling free from a slab of meat. Then I snapped out of my trance, realizing the stream of crimson blood oozing from the tiny hole in the tree. As soon as it hit my mud-crusted boots, I heard it, a blood-curdling scream echoing from the woodline behind me. It didn't sound human, but it didn't quite sound like an animal either. I bolted through the forest, crashing into the godforsaken trees as I went. My frantic flight through the woods abruptly ended with just a few more steps. I stumbled out onto the dirt road, falling onto my rifle as I tripped, finally reaching the path that led to my truck. I jumped into the cab, slammed the engine to life, and sped down the road. I never felt such relief in my life as I saw the familiar outline of my small house in the distance. Even now, 6 years later, I'm not ashamed to admit that I've never been hunting since, or even set foot in the woods, for that matter. But every once in a while, on a cold winter's night, I'll hear something in my yard, or sometimes even from behind my window. A voice I'll never forget, whispering something that haunts me to this day. "Hello, I see you. You know that, right?" Third story. I'm a psychologist. My patient has Wendigo psychosis. John had been my patient for months. I couldn't label him using official DSM codes, but he appeared to have what is known as Wendigo psychosis. At the time of my initial assessment, there wasn't any direct evidence that he tasted human flesh, although I could tell it was a significant preoccupation with him, and suspected him in the creation of several recent grisly scenes. "Just admiring the artwork in your office," John said to me one day. He grinned, letting me see through the teeth he filed down to fine points. "So much red. I wonder if we're alike, you and I." I swallowed nervously. I couldn't report his Wendigo psychosis to the authorities, though, because I would be perceived to be just as crazy as him. I couldn't even say he's a cannibal, even though he's come out and said his greatest fantasy is to devour a person over the course of 3 days. There was no proof. "So much red," John repeated, "like a sea of blood making its way to your kitchen table." He grinned again, seeming even more unstable. This has to stop, John. Right now, there's no direct evidence linking you to the murders. But if you keep eating people, your actions will eventually catch up to you. You haven't reported me yet. No evidence. No, I think it's because you like me. Deep down, you like me, David Morrison. Why? Why the hell would I like someone like you? I can't prove it, but I know you are a murderer. Not just that, a monster. John put a hand admiringly to his heart. You really think that about me? Yes, I do. I like to talk about your parents, John. My session with him ended a few minutes later, and I drove to the park, taking in the beauty of summer before heading home. My wife had gone on a business trip, so I had the place to myself. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. I popped on the TV. Hannibal was on, but I stopped myself from changing the channel. For some reason, I had become intrigued by monsters. For some reason, I shook my head. The reason was clear. John, I put dinner in the oven, a chicken stuffed with carrots and onions. While that cooked, I decided to go into the basement, do some late spring cleaning. Turning on the light, I surveyed the pile of unruly boxes. A few cocoons struggled as they hung from the ceiling. Their inner cores were human, weak from neuroses or traumatic life events to the extent that they were willing to visit a lonely psychologist's house for free therapy. You're happier this way, I said. And you call me a monster, John replied for the cocoon of silk. I turned around, greeting John's sharp teeth and blood-red eyes. He looked like a droopy-eyed hunting dog. Did you come to eat me, John? John hesitated, then shook his head. No, I'm here to learn from you. From a master. You've obviously found a perfect way to ensnare your victims. Teach me. So I showed John how I spun a spider's web from my own hands. I was afraid he would eat me at first, and even though he stared at me with those hungry, blood-red eyes, he left with a cocoon of silk over his left shoulder. The Wendigo told me later that he could give me the hunger, the fire in my gut, which would illuminate the path of my soul. I asked who had sent him. He told me John did, because he was so very grateful for the bundle of human flesh I gave him. A gift for a gift, the Wendigo said, disappearing into the basement gloom and leaving me alone with my thoughts. Fourth story. The thing in the woods took another kid. I tried to tell them it was a mistake to reopen. I told them what I saw all those years ago, but they didn't believe me then, so why would they now? Camp Soleil, changing the name for obvious reasons, is a camp in a small town that was made for rich, troubled kids. Your kid keeps leaving flaming bags of shit on the neighbor's porch? Send them to Camp Soleil, where they will make crafts and become little angels. Sounds like bullshit, right? It is. They come to camp and clean commodes and run until they are so miserable they don't feel like being the little devils they were. The camp is very hush-hush, only locals really know about. They get campers through the wealthy and well-connected sharing info with each other. Rarely they will accept locals. That's how I wound up there 11 years ago. My parents never really loved me. They mainly just tolerated me. That is, until I started acting out by throwing bricks through windows and robbing stores when I was 12. My dad grew up with the police chief, which kept me out of juvie, but the chief recommended I go to summer camp. My parents were happy to get rid of me. We were dirt poor, so I can only assume my mom blew the camp director to secure me a spot. I was glad, though. I would have done anything to get away from the yelling and fighting that kept me awake most nights. I soon wished I was back home. As soon as the bus stopped, we ran up the trail that stretched on for what had to be a mile while carrying all of our belongings. We stopped and got sorted to cabins, then began washing our dorms and showers with toothbrushes and sponges. At dinner, I made my friends with Devin. His parents were in the entertainment industry, producers or writers or something. He was funny and kind. Devin didn't belong there. His relationship with his parents was similar to mine, except he never really talked to them at all. He was mainly raised by his nanny, Susie, whom he loved like a mother. He only got sent there because his parents wanted to send him to a camp and some of their rich friends recommended this one. I hope they rot in hell for that. Camp was like this most days: run, clean, cook, eat, sleep, repeat. Saturdays were free, though. They pretty much let us do whatever without any observation. Devin and I were like glue, inseparable. We would explore the woods and began to notice strange things. We would hear people talking, but never see them. We would find what looked like bones and sticks making ornaments in trees. I know this sounds like cliché horror, but we honestly thought it was other campers playing pranks. Until the night Devin died. We went exploring that Saturday, as usual, when we heard the voices. We decided we would prank the pranksters this time. The hunters becoming the hunted, as Devin put it. So, we followed the voices, which were so faint and whispery that we couldn't make out what they were saying clearly. We reached a clearing, and suddenly it seemed as though the voices were all around us. Devin wanted to run. I should have listened to him, but I still hadn't had that badass mentality that Camp Soleil was trying to break inside of me. I thought if it was little rich pricks playing a joke, Devin and I could whip all of their asses. Then the whispers became clearer. They were saying, "Come here, little one, and feed the lost one, and break them." There was more, but I can't remember. I was getting pretty freaked out at this point. Then we heard something crashing towards us through the woods. I listened to Devin this time. We ran through the woods, but now the voices were following and getting louder. Their voices. They sounded like my parents, telling me they hated me, that I was a mistake. I was crying. It's things I knew they felt, but they had never told me. Suddenly, I was grabbed, and Devin was trying to get me to climb a tree. He was following, but I was slow. I couldn't collect myself enough to climb faster. I was a gutless, blubbering coward. The voices were closing in, and Devin told me to keep climbing. He dropped down and ran and hid under a fallen tree. The voices got closer and closer until it all stopped. I sat there for what was probably 30 minutes, quietly crying and looking around for what was chasing us. Devin stayed under the tree. As I slowly began to collect myself, I looked around and saw that we were by the lake. It was nearly dark, and the lake was about a 5-minute walk from the cabins. I tried to whisper shout at Devin that we needed to leave. He slowly came out and looked around. I started to climb down the tree when I froze. "Devin," called a female voice. "Susie? Is it you?" Devin replied. I tried to tell him to hush and hide, but the voice was growing louder. "Devin, honey, stay where you are. I'll come to take you home. They said you were a lost one. I have a home for you." There was something chasing us. I was so scared. "I want to go home." Devin responded through tears. I should have been brave. I should have stopped him, grabbed him and ran. Something, but I was paralyzed by my fear. What came out of the woods was a 7 feet tall, slender, with slimy gray skin in some places, fur in others, and human hair in yet other places. Its limbs were disproportionate and long, one arm ending in a stump, and the other in a large hand with long razor-sharp nails. Its head sprouted the antlers of a deer and the horns of a bull. It was beautiful and ugly. I was drawn to it and terrified all at once. Devin just stood there smiling. "I miss you so much, Susie," he said as he rushed to hug the creature. The beautiful voice turned to a rasp similar to a fork on a plate as it screamed, "Welcome home, lost one," before effortlessly lifting my friend in the air and ripping his torso from his legs. The last thing I saw before falling from the tree was the creature lifting Devin's poor lifeless body to its mouth. Then everything turned black. They said I got lost in the woods, fell, and got concussed. There was no evidence of what I saw, and Devin simply got separated and was still missing. I tried to tell them that I couldn't have been lost right by the lake, but it didn't matter. They wouldn't listen. Devin's parents suddenly cared, not enough for them to want it to be national news that their child was missing, but enough to want the camp shut down. I did my research and found kids have been going missing around here every so often for decades. The number spiked once Camp Soleil opened and dropped after it closed. Someone is hiding something. How has none of this made headlines? I know that thing took that kid. This time I'm doing something. Tonight, as Devin would say, the hunter becomes the hunted. I'm so sorry, Devin. I miss you. Fifth story. There are more than just bears in national parks. Hey there. Allow me to introduce myself as Mark, I won't specify my last name for safety reasons, but I have worked as a park ranger at Yellowstone National Park, which all of you know and have heard a lot about, especially if you live in the States. Apologies for my bad grammar. I am an immigrant that moved to the USA in 2008 from China, so my English skills would be very lacking, but I'm trying my best to share my experience in being a park ranger for 5 years. Being a park ranger gives you the opportunity to see things that are not seen by city folk, and some would even slide off the memory of the human race due to how hidden these things are, and trust me, Yellowstone is not different. They say the bears in Yellowstone are dangerous, which is true, and along with the wolves and other predators, but there's more than just bears and other critters that can tear you apart. The Yellowstone has very sinister inhabitants. Now, you may have heard of the Wendigo and may have considered them as folklore along with the skinwalkers, but in reality, they're part of the ecosystem in Yellowstone, but what's even more disturbing is that they're not at the top. I found it out in my second year as a park ranger. It was just like any other day, mundane, full of life, and I'm just carrying my tasks as a park ranger, assisting the hikers, patrolling the park, and watching over in the tower to look for wildfires and other stuff, and sometimes I do out of curiosity. That day, I can remember chilling in the cabin and eating food, though I don't remember what I was eating, but I remember my radio buzzing and the voice of my partner coming out of the radio. Mark? Mark? Requesting assistance near the tree line close to where some hikers camped last week. There seems to be a scene that needed to be investigated. The radio crackles. I pick it up and answer, "All right, be there in a few minutes." About 30 minutes later, I arrive at the spot only to be greeted by a grisly sight of a strange creature lying dead and full of wounds, large scratch marks, and its body was battered and gored. Perhaps this is what folks call the Wendigo, as the creature had a skull for a head and antlers. It looked formidable, but it looked like it was the latest victim of something bigger, and at the time, I am no in mood to meet the culprit, but I stayed. Kevin, what do you think that thing is?" I asked, clearly alarmed by its disturbing appearance and the horrible smell. "That's what we call a Wendigo," he answered without signs of irritation or apprehension to the smell. Now, Kevin was an older guy, a white dude in his 40s, tall and hugely built, but even he was short compared to the thing that lay dead in front of us. "What killed this thing?" I asked, disgust and dread etched on my voice, but somehow Kevin answered with calmness. "Bear could be a mother bear defending her cubs, or a male bear defending his territory. Anyway, bears suppress the population of these creatures and seemingly compete for the same resources. It's tall and all, but really doesn't stand much of a chance against a grizzly," Kevin said. Kevin went down on his knee to examine the stinking corpse while I put a distance between me and the dead Wendigo, as I cannot stand the smell. Kevin, on the other hand, kept investigating. This creature seemed to have just died last night from all these injuries. It sure was a brutal way to die. Though it's good that less of these creatures exist. They really are responsible for most missing cases here in Yellowstone, Kevin said with a satisfied grin. "I just need you to help me move T-Dash. He got cut off by the rustling in the nearby trees." And we both reached for our service weapons. Growls of a bear are heard, but what came forward was no grizzly. It was even more frightening as it ran towards us. Me and Kevin knew better than to be a bear's next meal, so we both rushed to the car and drove away. But that bear was no grizzly. No, it was too tall to be one, and the snout a bit shorter. It was as tall as me when it was on all fours. Kevin drove us away, and as we were going away, the bear stopped at the carcass and tore it apart in a brutal display. I believe that was the bear that killed the Wendigo, though it might be another bear, but that bear was huge, and it was the first time I ran into that huge bear. I still have more to share, but sleep is calling me now. I'll upload more of my experience in the future, but for the moment, can you help me with what that bear is? I've asked Kevin before, but he has no idea too. So maybe some of you have, and I would appreciate it. Sixth story. It wasn't a deer. I've been hunting all my life, and I have yet to see anything else like what I saw. To this day, I still don't have a definite answer for it. Maybe some of y'all will know. I was 19 at the time. I had just gotten off of work, so I figured I might as well go hunting. I got my rifle and hopped in my truck, and away I went. I got there about 3.5 hours before dark, plenty of time to get to my stand. I crossed the creek and started up the hill, and I saw something move fairly fast through the trees. I figure it must have just been a deer. Already spooked one. Not good. Got to my stand and climbed up it, text my dad to tell him I got there safe. I loaded my rifle and got comfortable and waited. About an hour later, a herd of does I had seen on my camera showed up. They milled around for about 30 minutes before they left to go eat some acorns behind me. I saw a 4-point about 10 minutes later, not what I was after. About 30 minutes later, I hear something making racket about 200 yards in front of me in a tree line across a field. I had an iron-sighted gun, so I wasn't willing to shoot the 200 yards. The gun I had was a .444 Marlin lever action. I'd hunted with it since I was 12 and had taken countless deer with it. It's a bit overkill for deer, but I like the stopping power. Eventually a deer walked out. Looked like a pretty good buck. As he got closer, about 150 yards, I noticed something was off with him. Maybe it was that CWD disease, or whatever it's called, I thought. It started making these unholy sounds and started to get up on its hind legs. I'd heard stories from old-timers about things that go thump in the woods, but never believed them. I decided I was probably just tired from work. He stayed in the field, still acting weird, until it was just about time for me to get down and head back to the truck. I started to get down and was about 10 feet off the ground when I heard a blood-curdling scream from the field. It scared the daylights out of me, and I slipped and fell off the ladder. When I got up, I looked back, and it was on its hind legs in a dead sprint towards me. I took off running and jumped in the creek and laid down on the bank. I peeked over the side, and it was up there, walking and looking for presumably me. He saw me, so I raised my rifle and fired. The shot rang out, and I heard it hit him. I racked another round in, but he was on the ground. I was relieved and my mind was spinning. Before I could think of my next move, he was back on his legs and started walking towards me. I ran so fast, I thought I was going to fall. He was about 15 yards behind me, but he was closing in. I turned around and fired another shot with hopes that it would stun him. It didn't. I counted my options and decided on a risky plan. I ran to a secondary path out, one which had a creek that was flooded from rain the night before. I swam across it, but he couldn't swim and he didn't want to seem to get anywhere near water. He let out another blood-curdling scream, so I shot him again. This time he seemed like it hurt him. I had one bullet left after that. I got to my truck, and of course it wouldn't start. That's what I get for driving a diesel in late November. I finally got it to turn over and started to back up when I saw him running at me, faster than he previously was. I stuck my rifle out the window of my truck and waited until he got close. He was about 10 feet in front of me when I fired. I could see him well when he was that close. He was a 10-point. His head had no bottom jaw or eyes, and his hide was peeling away. His entire body looked withered. When I shot, he hit the dirt hard. I hightailed home and told my dad what had happened. He didn't believe me. I went back the next day to see if there was any proof. He was gone. All the tracks were gone. There was nothing to even indicate it had even happened besides my spent casings on the ground. If anyone has any idea about what that thing was, please let me know. I'm writing this while I'm in the deer stand, so hopefully it's not bad luck, although I do hear a strange sound in the trees across from me. 7th story. Treating Wendigo psychosis. Snow falling outside my window, and I confess, I am, perhaps, what one might call a typical student of abnormal psychology, driven by a boundless curiosity and an unyielding desire to explore the darker recesses of the human mind. My days are spent in the relative comfort of academic routine, endless lectures, coursework, and hours hunched over case studies, chasing the elusive understanding of the disorders that plague the human psyche. My professors might call me the most dedicated in my cohort, but they would never use such words aloud. The admiration is implicit, of course, in the way they nod when I answer questions with a bit more precision than most, offering the occasional well done that feels earned. It's here within the predictable structure of my graduate studies that I find solace, methodical, logical, and clear. snowing peacefully towards my gaze, up into the gray cloud, silent, becoming the bed of ice. I've always felt at home in the realm of scientific inquiry, where ambiguity is dissected under the sharp light of reason. The human mind, with its intricate web of disorders, defense mechanisms, and cognitive peculiarities, has long been an object of both my study and fascination. My academic life, while grueling at times, never felt foreign. It was my haven. It is only when I think too long on it that the unsettling realization hits me. The very mind I so eagerly seek to understand has been responsible for horrors far beyond the reaches of rational thought. Always snowing now, always winter. There are moments when I find myself drawn to those disturbing corners of my textbooks, the chapters on culture-bound syndromes. Wendigo psychosis, for instance, is one such condition that always provokes my interest, yet stirs something dark within me. Descriptions vary, but one cannot ignore the consistent thread of human cannibalism, spiritual possession, and insatiable hunger that transcends mere survival instincts. To me, Wendigo psychosis isn't just another case of cultural superstition. It represents an attempt, albeit an unscientific one, to understand something beyond the capacity of conventional psychology. I sometimes wonder if we, as modern academics, do a disservice to the mysteries of the mind by dismissing such phenomena. It makes me laugh to realize as a child I understood that there are two medicines, one for the mind and one for the spirit. Who was I when I forgot that? I know who I am now, as I remember the truth. My life, as it were, took an unexpected turn when I was contacted by a rather peculiar mental health facility. Bison Lake Recovery Institute, they called it, tucked far away from any major city, isolated amidst the desolate stretches of northern Canada. The institution was shrouded in mystery, spoken of in hushed tones by my professors, its methods rumored to be, at best, unconventional, and at worst, a mockery of clinical science. Yet, something about it intrigued me, compelling me to pursue a possible internship, albeit reluctantly. Leaving the familiar, the forest passing me while I sit, the journey is one into the past, and somehow, the past is more familiar. Upon arriving at the facility, the first thing I noticed was the overwhelming silence, unnerving in its depth. There were no bustling corridors, no frantic footsteps of nurses or orderlies. Instead, the staff seemed as though they had been trained to move through the halls without making a sound, as if afraid to disturb the delicate calm of the patients' minds. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and something more, a subtle but unmistakable fear, though not one easily named. A sense of wrongness permeated every corner of the building, as though the very architecture itself was trying to contain something dark, something untamed. As I settled into my new role, observing, taking notes, assisting in basic treatments, I began hearing whispers. The patients spoke in hushed, fearful tones, wary of one another. In particular, one patient, a man named Sonny, whose violent outburst had earned him a reputation even among the hardened staff, was a subject of great curiosity. He was rumored to be suffering from a condition described as Wendigo psychosis, a diagnosis that had intrigued me for years. I overheard fragments of conversations in the hallways. "He's not like the others," one orderly had said. "It's the hunger. You can see it in his eyes." The rumors suggested that Sonny's actions mirrored the very behaviors associated with the Wendigo myth, a creature of insatiable hunger, said to be driven mad by the need to consume human flesh. As I delved deeper into my research and began speaking with the staff about Sonny, I couldn't shake a rising unease. I had always prided myself on my ability to separate my academic detachment from my emotional responses, yet something about this case, about him, was different. It reminded me of the stories I had heard growing up, tales of the Wendigo, passed down through generations in my family, whispered by elders as warnings. It seemed foolish now to think of those stories as anything more than folklore. But the feeling, the palpable fear in the eyes of the staff when they spoke of Sani had an uncanny way of reopening old wounds, wounds from my childhood, when I had witnessed the inexplicable behavior of a distant relative. My uncle, a man of stoic character and strength, had shown strange behavior after a long, bitter winter. He became reclusive, his appetite insatiable, devouring anything in sight, even the bitterest scraps. I remember the way he looked at me once, his eyes darkened by something I couldn't name, as though he saw me not as his niece, but as food. There had been no rational explanation for his actions. He was eventually found near the woods, emaciated and delirious, muttering incoherently about a creature lurking just beyond the reach of the trees. He died soon after. I was just a child, and though I had always assumed it was simply madness brought on by isolation, I couldn't help but recall that unsettling look in his eyes. Could have been Wendigo psychosis? In terror, I climbed out that open window and took off running across the snow with nothing on my feet. As I now found myself ensnared in the same web of fear surrounding Sani, I could no longer ignore the nagging question. Was it possible that this condition, this Wendigo psychosis, was more than just a cultural anomaly? What if it was something deeper, something that defied rational explanation, something that no amount of clinical research could cure? The more I learned about Sani and his case, the more I found myself caught between two forces: the relentless pull of academic curiosity and a fear buried deep within me that this would be the case that tested the very limits of what I believed about the human mind. The Wendigo is not a creature easily contained by the pages of a textbook or confined to the neat, sterile diagrams of my lectures. No, it is far older, a part of the fabric of the land and the cultures of the indigenous peoples of North America, especially among the Algonquian-speaking tribes. I first encountered the Wendigo in my studies of culture-bound syndromes. The myths tell of a tall, gaunt figure, so emaciated that its skin clings to its bones like the tattered remnants of a forgotten soul. Its hunger, insatiable and all-consuming, leads it to devour not only human flesh but the very essence of its prey, stealing their spirit and leaving nothing but a hollow shell behind. What fascinates me and terrifies me is not merely the creature's grotesque physicality, but the psychological terror it embodies. The Wendigo is said to possess those who succumb to the primal urges of cannibalism during harsh winters, turning them into ravenous beasts incapable of control. The afflicted, in their madness, lose their humanity, driven by an unquenchable thirst for human flesh. They are no longer themselves, transformed into something inhuman, as if the very act of consumption has stripped them of their soul. I have read about the symptoms of Wendigo psychosis, the paranoia, the obsession with hunger, the eventual descent into madness and violence. But something in me cannot help but wonder if there's more to it, something hidden beneath the layers of folklore and superstition. What you remember, who you think you are, these are mere choices for the ancient demon, and yet you become the claws it uses to make gestures. As I spent more time in the Bison Lake Recovery Institute, I began to piece together the fragments of information scattered through hushed conversations and nervous glances exchanged by staff. They spoke of Sani with an unease that was palpable, though their words were never direct. When I asked one of the nurses, a woman named Linda, about Sani's condition, she hesitated for a long moment before answering. "He's different," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not like the others. He's hungry in a way that's hard to describe. Not just for food, but for something more. There's something dark about him." Her words struck me in a way I couldn't explain. I pushed her further, asking if she thought it was a case of Wendigo psychosis. She visibly recoiled at the term, as though even speaking it aloud might summon something unseen. "Sometimes," she murmured, "we hear him at night, scratching like he's trying to dig his way out of the walls. And then there are the sounds. Laughter. But it's not human laughter. It's unsettling. Later, another staff member, an orderly who had worked at the facility for over a decade, pulled me aside, looking over his shoulder as though ensuring no one overheard. "You should leave that one alone," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "There are things in these woods you can't understand. Sonny, he's not the first. We've had others like him, you know. People who disappear, who are found later, changed. But no one wants to talk about that." The more I pressed for details, the more fragmented the accounts became. One patient, a woman in her late 50s who had been at the hospital for many years, seemed to know more than she let on. Her name was Lana, and she had been one of the few to speak openly about the creature she had encountered in her youth. During one of our sessions, she started to speak in broken, disjointed sentences. "I saw it once," she said, her eyes wide with something akin to terror. "In the woods, when I was a girl. A tall thing, with eyes like frozen lakes. It didn't walk. It moved like it was floating above the ground. And it called to me, not with words, but in my head. You think it's just a story, but it's real. The Wendigo is real." She then went silent for the remainder of the session, her eyes darting nervously, as though expecting the creature to appear at any moment. I tried to press her for more details, but she simply clammed up, her lips trembling. I looked at the blood on my hands and on the crumbled snow I had tried to use to clean them. As I continued my research into Sonny's case, I began to notice strange occurrences around the hospital. Lights flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows in the hallways. There were whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to emanate from nowhere in particular. What unsettles me most, more than the stories or the whispers, is the feeling that something is watching. Not just in a psychological sense, as though the building itself might be haunted, but something tangible, something aware of my every movement. The Wendigo, if it exists, is not bound by the limitations of the human mind. It is elusive, a shadow that flickers in the corner of your vision, but never quite in full view. And this is what makes it so terrifying. Its presence is not marked by loud screams or savage growls. It is silent, invisible. It leaves only the faintest trace of its existence. A broken twig, the fleeting scent of something rotting in the air, a distant, unplaceable sound in the night. I hear something following me in the snow as I walk barefoot. I turn and look, and it is my own shadow, in the shape of a hung deer carcass, with no meat left on it, and the antlers reach the top of the fresh snow as the rope creaks, and the tips of the horns draw those sacred circles. As I walk through the hallways of the Bison Lake Recovery Institute, I can't shake the feeling that something is following me, watching me. It's not just Sonny who is possessed by this hunger, but the very institution itself. The walls, the rooms, the ground beneath our feet are saturated with it. The deeper I go into my research, the closer I come to a terrifying realization. The Wendigo is not just a legend. It is a force, a presence, that is very much alive, waiting to consume those who venture too far into its domain. The question is no longer whether the Wendigo exists. It's whether it will let me leave before it consumes me. 2. The more I dug into the accounts and research surrounding Wendigo psychosis, the clearer it became. The creature, the affliction, was not just a psychological condition, but a looming presence that could not be reasoned with. Its hunger was a primal force, an insatiable abyss that consumed everything in its path, not only devouring flesh, but also the soul of its victims. I could sense this truth creeping into the edges of my rationality, as if the walls of the Bison Lake Recovery Institute were closing in around me. There was no escape from the shadows of the Wendigo. What frightened me the most, as I gathered information, was how the Wendigo did not simply feed, it hunted. And it hunted with purpose, in ways that transcended the natural world. I thought back to the readings I'd conducted, specifically John R. Colombo's Canadian Folklore, where he references countless historical accounts of the Wendigo's predatory behavior. The Wendigo's influence is always present where hunger is born of desperation, he wrote, a line that chilled me when I considered its relevance to what was happening here. The Wendigo is not drawn to mere hunger. It is summoned by the depths of isolation, the darkness that overtakes those left without help, without humanity. The smell of sage draws my spirit up and lets it slowly settle into a peaceful way of sitting. The smoke drifts in circles, and in a circle the pipe is passed, using tobacco in a sacred way. As I spoke with more patience, one pattern became unmistakable. The Wendigo appeared when its victims were isolated, vulnerable, often pushed to the brink of starvation. It was no coincidence that the patients suffering from Wendigo psychosis had been cut off from their communities, exiled to this bleak facility. It thrives on desperation, on a deep, gnawing hunger that nothing else can satisfy. The terror of this discovery was unlike any other fear I had experienced. As I absorbed this knowledge, I began to see the world through a new lens. Every flickering light, every shadow cast by the trees outside, seemed to take on an otherworldly quality. The walls of the hospital were no longer mere bricks and mortar. They felt like barriers, thinly veiling something much darker, something far more ancient than I had ever anticipated. I had walked into this place thinking I was investigating a mental condition, something measurable, scientific. But the more I uncovered, the more I realized I was dealing with something that didn't adhere to any logic or understanding I had. Lana, the elderly patient, was the first to break the veil of silence surrounding the Wendigo's presence. I had asked her to describe any patterns she'd noticed in the creature's behavior, and she responded with quiet urgency. "It's drawn to weakness, child. Fear makes it stronger," she said. Her voice was trembling, her hands twisted tightly in her lap. "You think it's just hunger, but it's more than that. It's hunting. It knows when you're close to breaking. It knows when you're alone." I wasn't sure if she meant Sani or the Wendigo, or perhaps both. But I could see the fear in her eyes, fear not just of the creature, but of the fact that it was stalking all of us. We were all connected to it now. It could be anyone, anywhere. Then there was the orderly's stories. One of them, a younger man named Ryan, confessed during a late-night shift that he'd heard strange noises near the woods behind the hospital. He said that on one occasion, he had gone out to investigate, only to see the silhouette of something tall, too tall for any human figure, drifting just beyond the tree line. He thought it was one of the patients or a prank until the figure turned its head towards him. And the eyes, they were hollow, black holes, empty voids, like the creature had no soul left at all. It wasn't human, it was aware of him. "I swear, something's out there," Ryan said, his voice raw but firm. "You don't get it. We're being watched, and we're not alone." I looked down at his body, his red ribs darkened by the bitter cold that howled with biting ferocity. I looked up and thought I saw the yellow eyes of wolves all around, but I realized I was only seeing my own reflection in the darkness. I couldn't stop myself from continuing to investigate, even as the terror grew stronger. The more I learned about the Wendigo, the more I understood that its presence followed certain patterns that might give us a chance to defend ourselves if we could only recognize them in time. But each realization I had brought with it a deeper, darker realization. There was no sure way to escape it. In her notes, Dr. Gavigan, in Hunger, Horses, and Government Man, discusses the connection between the Wendigo and starvation, particularly in the northern regions of Canada, where food is scarce and winters are brutal. The Wendigo is tied to deprivation, not just of food, but of hope. It feeds on the isolation of its victims, drawing them into its grasp when they are at their weakest, when they can no longer trust their own minds. I saw that same fear reflected in the behavior of patients here. Those who had been isolated the longest, those who had no contact with family or the outside world, were the ones who spoke of strange noises at night, of seeing shadowy figures outside their windows. Their symptoms mirrored the descriptions in the folklore: paranoia, a growing obsession with hunger, and a loss of self-control. But it wasn't just the patients. Staff members who worked too closely with these cases also began to show signs of something off. Linda had mentioned the scratching sounds in the walls, but I began to hear them, too. At night, they were faint but persistent, as though something was trying to claw its way into the building. As the days passed, I started to see signs that the Wendigo was closing in on me, too. I found myself thinking about hunger constantly, not just for food, but for something else. A gnawing feeling at the back of my mind that grew worse as I spent more time researching. The Wendigo does not just feed on the body, but on the mind. The more I focused on it, the more it seemed to invade my thoughts, creeping in like a dark fog. The line between scientific curiosity and fear began to blur, until I wasn't sure if I was researching Wendigo psychosis or slowly becoming consumed by it myself. At night, I heard the laughter too. It was low, echoing through the halls. I told myself it was only the wind. It had to be, but deep down I knew better. The Wendigo was here, and it was coming for all of us. Sometimes the laughter was my own. Sometimes I asked who I was at that facility. I couldn't stop myself. The more I read, the more I had to know. The Wendigo had become a fixation, an all-consuming obsession that blurred the lines between academic pursuit and an existential dread I could no longer escape. I had always prided myself on rationality, on my ability to dissect human behavior through the lens of abnormal psychology. But this was something beyond even my most vivid nightmares. It was as though I were standing on the precipice of something ancient and malevolent, a force so primal that it defied reason. I started reading everything I could find on Wendigo psychosis, its historical records and folklore. Wendigo psychosis, as defined by researchers such as Shelley Gavigan, was a mental illness linked to intense, overwhelming feelings of hunger that led its victims to engage in cannibalism. But it was more than just an eating disorder. It was a transformation, an evolution of the human mind into something monstrous. Those afflicted would experience delusions of starvation and consume human flesh, believing it was the only means to stave off death. But the horror didn't end there. The psychosis was known to twist the individual's mind, filling them with a maddening desire to become the Wendigo itself. I began to draw connections between the ancient legends and modern psychological theories. Each piece of information fueling my determination to understand this terrifying condition. As I referenced John R. Columbo's Canadian folklore again, I found myself haunted by one line in particular. The Wendigo does not simply consume the body. It feeds on the soul, dragging its victims into a shadowed world where their very existence is questioned. I wondered if this was what was happening here, if the patients in this hospital weren't just physically ill, but psychically consumed by the Wendigo's presence. Was there a deeper connection between the affliction and the legends that have been passed down through generations? Could the psychosis be a modern manifestation of something much older? I felt as though I were unraveling a mystery that had no clear answer, only more questions. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. There was only one way to understand this madness fully, to explore the truth behind the terrifying tales of the Wendigo. I had to speak to the cannibal patient. Sonny, the patient who had been described in hushed tones by staff and other patients alike. The one who had murdered and eaten his family in a fit of insanity. The one who had reportedly been found covered in blood, muttering to himself about the hunger that gnawed at him from the inside. His case had been the catalyst for my research, his existence the focal point of my academic pursuit. And now, he was my only opportunity to uncover the truth. I began preparing myself. Doctor and Gavigan's hunger, horses, and government men had made it clear that these types of individuals were not to be underestimated. The transformation into the Wendigo wasn't just psychological, it was physical. It altered the very essence of a person. The human mind, starved and tortured, would shatter under the weight of its own primal urges, distorting reality. If I were to sit across from someone like that, I would have to steel myself against more than just his words. The hospital staff cautioned me against the interview. I had overheard whispers among the orderlies about Sonny's behavior, how he had become more violent recently, even aggressive at times. But I was too far gone. I couldn't back away now. I had to learn to understand, even if it meant putting myself at risk. The night before the interview, the paranoia settled in. I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in my room seemed to move, every creak of the building sending my heart into overdrive. I kept seeing things at the corner of my vision, shapes that seemed to vanish the moment I turned to face them. I blamed it on the stress. But deep down, I knew better. I thought back to the words of the orderlies. Linda had told me, the longer you stay here, the harder it is to tell what's real anymore. The isolation gets to you. It was as though she had seen through me, pinpointing the very fear I had been trying to ignore. I had spent days researching, hours poring over pages of psychological case studies and folklore, but I hadn't realized how much the isolation was eating away at me. It was only now in the dead of night that I understood. The Wendigo didn't need to physically hunt you. It could drive you into madness long before it sank its teeth into your flesh. I thought back to Dr. Richard T. Jabbar's mental disorders in specific cultures, where he had discussed the cultural influence of isolation and starvation on the human psyche. There was a theory he'd referenced that had stuck with me. Psychological stressors, when coupled with environmental deprivation, can lead to conditions where the individual loses their grip on reality. What follows is a breakdown of the boundary between the self and the other, a complete surrender to the mind's most primal fears. The more I read, the more I wondered if the Wendigo wasn't just a cultural manifestation of this. Could it be that the isolation in this facility was warping my mind, twisting my perception of what was happening around me? Was the hunger I felt for knowledge starting to take on a new, darker meaning? I felt it then, the creeping, gnawing sensation at the back of my mind, like something was waiting to devour me. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. If I sing to you, will you know the truth? I couldn't focus. Every time I tried to sit down and make sense of the information I gathered, the shadows seemed to creep closer. There was something suffocating about this place, something oppressive, a heaviness that weighed on my chest, making it harder to think clearly. It wasn't just the isolation, though that certainly didn't help. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, pulsating with a dark energy that lured me deeper into the abyss of my own thoughts. I had always prided myself on being grounded in rationality, on using logic and facts to dissect human behavior. But the further I delved into the history of Wendigo psychosis, the more I began to doubt myself. Was this condition real, or was it simply a construct of folklore, a way to explain the unexplainable? I pored over memory of nature in Aboriginal, Canadian, and American contexts, looking for any clue that might bring me closer to understanding the root of Wendigo psychosis. There were references to indigenous exorcisms and healing practices that I found troubling. The book spoke of rituals deeply rooted in tradition, where shamanic figures would attempt to exorcise the Wendigo spirit from those afflicted. I had read about the medicine men who would perform these rites, chanting and using sacred objects, but something about these accounts unsettled me. The power of the rituals seemed undeniable, yet they were described with such fervor that it was impossible not to question if the accounts were exaggerated. Mystical tales woven by centuries of cultural lore. It is here I shall begin my confession, and for that, I must sing. In the middle of my research, I had another unsettling experience. I woke in the dead of night to a sound that almost seemed like it was calling to me. It was a voice, but not one I recognized. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but the voice persisted, faint but clear. Come, see me, find out. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing. The voice had come from the shadows, and I knew it had come from somewhere deep within this facility. The madness of the place seemed to twist my perception, bending reality until I could no longer tell if I was hearing voices or if my mind was breaking. What was happening to me? Was I becoming like them? Like Sani? The sacred act of confession, the sacred act of eating the Eucharist, the body of the human, a portal to the world beyond, outside the silent winter, where the key is to enter, to devour, and be free from the weight of powerlessness and death. The fear that had been growing inside of me began to bloom into full paranoia. The night had become suffocating, and the isolation felt like a physical presence that pressed against me from all sides. I couldn't escape it, couldn't outrun the darkness that had begun to creep into my thoughts. Every part of me, every cell, every instinct screamed that I should leave, but something kept me rooted to this place. The truth was just within reach. I began reading the psychological papers again. This time, I turned to Dr. Richard T. Jabbar's mental disorders in specific cultures and reread the sections on culture-bound syndromes, particularly those related to cannibalism-induced psychosis. Jabbar discussed how the individual's belief in the Wendigo spirit could overpower any therapeutic attempts. The mind of the patient, once consumed, became locked in a world of starvation and insatiable hunger. There was no cure, no treatment. In the end, it was only through the intervention of the spiritual world that the afflicted might find peace. The parallels between the research and my own experiences were becoming too much to ignore. I wasn't just studying a psychological condition anymore. I was being pulled into it. My thoughts turned darker, more fragmented, as I wondered, had I, too, been infected by the Wendigo? In the eyes, a kind of fire that consumes not with heat and light, but with cold and darkness. In my desperation, I turned back to the indigenous traditions. I needed something, anything, to guide me through this madness. That's when I found the passage in Hunger, Horses, and Government Men that described an exorcism, a ritual performed by a medicine man to rid a person of the Wendigo spirit. The ritual was chillingly detailed. A sacred fire would be started, and the afflicted individual would be surrounded by a circle of medicine men. The chanting would begin, slow and deliberate, as they called upon the spirits of the ancestors. A key part of the ritual was the use of sage to purify the air and cedar to cleanse the spirit. But perhaps the most unsettling part of the ritual was the final step. The patient would be forced to confess their sins, to speak the hunger aloud, to accept the Wendigo inside them, and then expel it. I found myself shivering as I read, my mind reeling with the implications. Was I supposed to undergo such a ritual? Was that the key? The cold dread of my own involvement in this ancient practice felt suffocating. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't escape the feeling that I was on the verge of something terrible. The door to Sani's room had been left open just a crack, and I could see a shadow moving within. A low muttering filtered out into the hall. He was speaking to himself, but it wasn't in any language I recognized. It sounded like the guttural tones of someone lost in the depths of their own mind. I stood frozen at the threshold of his door, fighting the urge to run, knowing that if I didn't confront him, I would be no better than the rest of them. The ones who had succumbed to the hunger, ravenous for the spirit, ravaged by what cannot be. It is between this life, the shedding of our bodies, our spirits into birds. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle. The darkness inside seemed to reach out to me, pulling me in. The door creaked as I stepped into Sani's room. The air was thick, a mixture of antiseptic and something else, something ancient and raw, like the scent of decay. Sani was sitting in the corner, hunched over, his back turned to me. I could hear the faint sound of mumbling, too soft to catch the words at first. I cleared my throat. Sani. He didn't respond at first. His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then in a low rasp he spoke. Come closer. You want to know, don't you? His voice was strange, distorted, as if there was another presence behind it. I hesitated, but the pull was undeniable. Slowly, I stepped into the room, the sound of my footsteps loud in the silence. Sonny turned to face me. His eyes were wide, unblinking, but there was something off about them. The whites of his eyes seemed unnaturally bright, almost glowing, and his pupils were dilated, swirling with an unsettling hunger. "You've been reading about me, haven't you?" he whispered, his voice dripping with something dark and knowing. "About the Wendigo, about the hunger, about the thing that's waiting inside." I shuddered. My heart thudded in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. This was what I'd come for, what I'd been preparing for. "Yes," I managed to say, trying to steady my voice. "I've been trying to understand. What is it, Sonny? What's happening to you?" He tilted his head to the side, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his expression, something that almost resembled a smile. But it was twisted, grotesque, like it didn't belong to him at all. I know the hideous thought. I'd put it into words to make my memory fade. "I will confess what my thoughts know. You will understand, or it will consume you. You think it's just a sickness, don't you?" he murmured. "A simple psychosis. But it's not. It's a calling. The hunger is a voice, a hunger that eats away at your soul. It doesn't just consume your flesh. It consumes your very essence." He reached up, his hand trembling as he brushed his lips with his fingers. "It's calling you too. I can see it in your eyes. You're just like me. You want to feel it, to understand it. You think knowledge will keep you safe." I felt my pulse quicken. "That's not true. I just need to know what's happening to you. What I am, you are too. Whatever I know, you have forgotten, and when I die, we shall reverse our role. That is why I must be kind to you, and you must be kind to the next, for they are we, and we all suffer what we inflict." Sonny's lips parted in a slow, unsettling grin. "What's happening to me?" he repeated. "Oh, I'm not the one you should be worried about. The Wendigo, it's inside of you now. Can't you feel it? That gnawing, that need." I flinched. He was right. I had been feeling it, the gnawing hunger, but I hadn't dared acknowledge it. I had thought it was just fear, the fear of what I was uncovering. But now it felt different. Something dark and insidious was growing inside me. "You don't understand." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor beneath the words. "I'm not like you. I'm not one of them." Sonny's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharpening with a predatory gleam. "Oh, you're much like me. You feel it, don't you? The hunger is the same for everyone, whether it's for flesh or for truth. It's the same thing. The more you seek, the more it calls you. Whatever I can remember, I do not remember the taste of human flesh." His voice dropped to a whisper, and for a moment I thought I heard something else, something deeper, more guttural. "And when you finally give in, when you let it take you, there's no turning back. You'll become like me, like the others. You'll hunger for the flesh, for the life, for the power." A sudden wave of dizziness washed over me. My mind reeled, as if the very air was becoming thick with something foul, something that didn't belong. I wanted to back away, but I couldn't move. He reached out, his fingers curling like claws, and I felt my body freeze in place. The hunger, it was like a wave crashing over me, rising up from some deep, primal place I didn't want to acknowledge. In isolation, human depravity. The family stares at him, shaking with his back to them. They look helpless, their mouths slightly open in muted terror. "I've seen it," Sonny whispered, his voice now low and velvety, like a serpent coaxing its prey. "The Wendigo is not a spirit. It's a beast, a thing that can take over your mind, your body, your very soul. It waits until you are weak, until you starve yourself, not just of food, but of humanity." I swallowed hard, the words cutting through me. How do I stop it? Winter approaches, the dreaded season of death. White silence, when the song of creation is forgotten, and the darkness glows as the moon knows the snow is white. Sonny's grin grew wider, his teeth sharp and inhuman. "You can't stop it. You're already too far gone, but you can embrace it. Become it. Just let go. In the darkness, shivering. It is cold night. The forest is ready to consume me. The forest consumes all. Nothing leaves the forest. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears, the dizziness threatening to pull me under. The room was spinning, and for a moment, I thought I saw something moving behind Sonny, something shadowy, like a dark shape that loomed in the corners of my vision. But when I blinked, it was gone. In the name of God, most holy, I cast thee out, demon. You'll understand, eventually, Sonny whispered, his voice becoming a low growl. The hunger will take you, like it took me, and you'll never be alone again. I am living woman, and I've never seen snow where I live. My people are as old as yours, and I'm the sister of your shaman. I know it is my responsibility to bring my strong medicine. I couldn't breathe. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and despair, but some twisted instinct drove me to act. I stepped back, my feet moving on their own as I scrambled for the door. As a child, I placed my bare feet in the snow, and I laughed. I heard Sonny's voice calling after me, a mocking, guttural laugh that echoed in the room, sinking deep into my bones. Run, run, but you can't escape the hunger. It's already inside of you. My name was like a howl in the night, and I could not escape the call. I was running across the snow, across the ice, and my feet burned, and I ran faster and faster, and it was as though a bird of prey gripped me in its claws and lifted me for distances as I ran, as though I would become airborne. I left the room, the door slamming shut behind me. My body was trembling, every part of me alive with an electric fear that felt like it was crawling under my skin. The ancient demon takes a piece of you and replaces it with a piece of itself. It does this again and again until you're not you anymore. I must ask for help. I must ask the man I know who sings like wind. He will help me if I tell him I will confess in the darkness, under open skies, while the sacred fire burns. I stumbled down the hallway, barely able to focus on anything other than the sound of my own breath, shallow and frantic. The fear gnawed at me, but it was more than fear, it was hunger. I felt it deep inside, something dark and primal stirring, wanting to break free. I'll beg for help from the neighbor, a shaman, whose sister has arrived from a distant land. 2 exorcists, sings like wind, and living woman. They say I can be cured before sacred fire, with a confession. I couldn't escape the memory of Sonny's eyes, those glowing, predatory eyes. The words he had spoke rang in my mind, like a curse that wouldn't let go. Where was I when they found me, wandering near my childhood home? How could I have walked barefoot through the snow? I could feel it inside me now. The hunger, the thing I'd been studying for months, had written papers about, researched obsessively. It had consumed me, and there was no turning back. Sings Like Wind and Living Woman stopped dancing and placed both pieces of the broken cedar staff across each other in front of me. The darkness had taken hold, and I wasn't sure if I could fight it anymore. I stared into the flames, knowing this fire from early childhood. I confessed in song all that I had done. For me, my spirit lifted, and I became whole again. Thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. Drop your suggestions in the comment section.